Stephen Lund, your host with White Labs, an e-commerce marketing agency. Today's guest is Glen. Glen, feel free to introduce yourself and let our viewers know a little bit more about yourself.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Glen Smyth. I'm the CEO and founder of a brand called Appleflats. We're an ag tech company focused on commercializing a variety of Canadian crabapple that is going extinct. The real simple thesis here was if we could show that there is money to be made on this piece of crabapple, then other orchards would plant and grow them and therefore keep the species around by assigning a dollar figure to it. So it's a very, very simple thesis. It's much more complicated than we originally anticipated. And because of that, it's led us down a kind of winding, interesting track that leads me to the podcast here today.
Awesome. How did you get into the apple business?
So, like all good things, it was mostly an accident. We had two real driving forces that happened here. So, number one, we had this type of crabapple on our front yard since my parents built the property in 1991. It was not intentionally designed to be a business by any stretch of the imagination. We made crabapple jelly as a family, just again, one of our typical traditions. And then in my second year of university, my brother, who was working on the pipelines in Alberta and BC, invited me to come and work with him out there. And we happened to be back together one summer. We just were at my parents' house and we decided to harvest the tree and make crabapple jelly. Except unfortunately now in our 20s, we were a lot more productive. And what ended up happening is we produced about 250 to 300 jars of jam, which is way more than our family could ever eat. So we called a couple of local cheese shops. We sold a few of the jars, made a few $100s. We thought it was really cool. And we went, I went back to university in that fall and my brother went back out to the pipeline. Honestly, we never really thought anything about it past that. And then 6 months later, those cheese shops called us, said, hey, are you interested in making some more? And we thought, yeah, sure, why not? And that's what led us down this research path, because when we went to go and buy crabapples at the produce terminal, the same way you would buy strawberries or bananas or apples, you can't.
Yeah.
And so we started for the next 6 months trying to figure out where could you buy crabapples. Again, not thinking that this would be a business, and ultimately discovered that not only can you not buy them, the apple seems to be somewhere between 30 and 50 years from extinction as they're all being torn out. So that was part number one. Part number two was, in our experience working out west, many of the people that we had talked to out there were relatively uncomfortable with the environmental damage that was happening, but it was the best way for them to put food on the table and feel respected for what they were doing because the skill sets were remarkable. And we kind of partnered those two concepts together in the idea that if we can make someone's full-time living off of these crabapples, they will show up every day, even when it's hard, to fight to keep those crabapples around because that's how they feed their family. So it kind of partnered those two very simple ideas together, and we started Appleflats in August of 2016 with the idea of commercializing these heritage crabapples.
Awesome. Who is your ideal target audience?
For a customer or to actually talk to the brand about? Because those are two very different things.
Go into both, of course. Go ahead.
So our target customers typically about 25 to 55. They're typically a little bit more socially conscious. We find that if they have kids, they use the product in a different way. Yeah. So if they have kids, they just consume it as a soda. If they don't have kids, they're a lot more likely to mix it with alcohol, to make some cocktails with it. But they're a little on the higher end of income. And then there's a couple of interesting character traits. So they're a lot more likely to be social. So they have a much larger social network. They're doing a lot more social events. So this is either younger with kids or older with kids, or no kids at all. All of the big factors seems to be that they're very social individuals, really seem to enjoy what we're doing. And then the environmentally conscious, social conscious. And that's really what our customers are hunting for because we are a carbon negative firm.
Awesome.
In terms of who I like talking to about this, My favorite is actually high school students. The reason being is they're so full of optimism that when I explain to them some of the weird things that we do to try and make this firm work, they are totally right along there with me. They don't ask, well, why is it so weird? Because they have no concept that it is weird. They just think it's really cool that you can build something like that. So the high school kids are usually the ones that are really excited. So we do a good chunk of conversations about how you build a business or mentorship at the high school level.
Awesome. Do you have competition doing something like you or no?
No, not really. No, in the sense that there's no competition for our actual apple. Yes, in the sense that the products that we produce, which is mostly a craft soda, there's lots of competition there. So there's competition on the retail end of it. But in terms of actually harvesting or competing for the apples that are available, no, not really. The largest competition at that point is market inertia and also a lack of technology. So we've had to invent multiple machines to actually work with crab apples because you can't harvest them like normal apples. They're too small. So we needed to invent, how do you grow them? How tall do you grow them? How wide do you grow them? How much fertilizer do you put on them? All of that is entirely new. And so there's a lot more hard science involved in this than we were anticipating when we started. We really did underestimate how complicated it was to commercialize an apple.
Wild. What you see like very, very, very little, like what makes you kind of touch on it a little bit? What makes you better than your competitors?
It's not a question of being better per se. Most of what we're actually promoting here is an ability for what would be competitors to add an entirely new branch of product into their portfolio. So I'll give you an example of something that we do that's relatively unusual. Is we actively fund our end retail product competitors with crabapple products of our own. So we make a crabapple jelly that sits on store shelves. We have actually actively sold raw crabapple juice to other firms to make a crabapple jelly to sit next to our own crabapple jelly. And the logic being here is the biggest enemy at this point in time is that no one really knows what a crabapple is. They're not sure how it's distinct from regular apples. So what we're actually trying to do here is educate a larger marketplace. So the more firms that can produce a crabapple, anything, the better. So we've done crabapple. We've worked with firms to do crabapple ice cream, crabapple hard cider, which we also make. So we're funding competitors there as well. Crabapple jellies, crabapple salad dressings, you name it. We're really just trying to explain that there is a new type of apple that you can cook with, eat with, work with, and come up with really great products for. So our largest competition at this point is education.
Awesome. Well, speaking of all of your crabapple products, what is your best-selling product or your most popular?
The most popular is probably our sour apple soda. I say that ironically because we just sold the last of our cans until harvest. We anticipated selling a few, like 10, 20,000 cans in our first year, and we're way over that. We're closer to 75,000 cans.
Wow.
So we do not have any more of that sour apple left. We will make more in September, but as of today, we actually don't have any more of that left. So that one's probably our best selling. Peach is usually a little bit better of a seller, but we haven't had it quite as long. So we'll see if it overtakes the apple.
Awesome. Well, being an entrepreneur, I'm sure you've had some challenges. What are some challenges that you faced in the past few years, and how were you able to overcome them?
So I'm going to take this to a place that's a little bit more general than our specific challenges. Because if I look at what is really challenging for our firm, it's very unique in the sense that how do you harvest a fruit that no one else wants to harvest? And no one else really is going to have that problem. It's a very weird thing to try and overcome. But what I will say is that the way that we overcame it is the way that you can overcome pretty much any problem, which is building data feedback systems and then listening to the data, even if it's contrary to what you think is supposed to be happening. So I'll give you a really good example of one of the marketing campaigns we used, because this is a more applicable component. We do the same thing for harvest, but we'll come back to that. So I had a really good, or what I thought was a really good marketing idea to put on Spotify. We ran the ad, and we also ran a competitive ad that I really didn't think was particularly interesting. There was two fundamentally different concepts. One of them was promoting the product itself. It had sound effects, it had voiceovers, like it was a really well produced ad. And that was the one that I thought would do really well. Conversely, we put a second ad mostly as a control, and it was just one voice reading stuff about the product and telling customers where to get it. And that was way more effective, like 4 times more effective. And when we ran a follow-up ad to try and figure out why that was, it turns out that my really well-produced ad had so much going on that when there's an interruption in the original music, the people didn't have time to register everything that I was saying because there was other sounds that were going on. So the data told me that I was wrong, and sometimes that's really hard to hear, but that's what it says. And so even though boring ads were more effective and that was totally counterintuitive, that's ultimately what we decided to end up running. And we, from that point onwards, we toned down everything else that we could do. So I'm wrong lots and lots and lots of times. And the best way to prove to yourself that you are wrong is by having really robust data sets. And one of the things that's fantastic about e-commerce in general is that there is incredible, vast amounts of data that you can garner on your customers, that you can garner on anything that you're using, and that's really advantageous. So take advantage of that. We do the exact same thing for harvest. I can talk at length about a weird harvest that we do, but it's super unique just to us.
Feel free if you want.
So one of the things that we do that is really unique to Appleflats as a brand, we did plant our own orchard to try and figure out how do you actually grow these trees commercially. But as many of your listeners will know, or they can probably guess, apples don't show up immediately when you plant trees. It actually takes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years sometimes to get really good commercial volume. So if I'm planting an orchard in 2016, only now am I actually starting to get real serious commercial volumes of fruit. So what do you do in 2017 or 2018 or 2019? Well, what we did is we made this gamble bet, so to speak, that if we had a tree on our front yard, other people probably would have a tree on their front yard too. So we ran an ad in the local newspaper saying we would like to come and harvest your crabapple tree, which is really weird. And we got a handful of trees. I think it was 6 or 7. So we harvested those. And then the next year we got more and more. And as we started doing, consumer shows, pop-up shows, we got on a couple of TV shows, people would contact us. Hey, I've got a crabapple tree. Would you like to come and harvest it? In fact, after this airs, people are probably going to send me an email. Hey, I have a crabapple tree. Would you like to come and harvest it? And we checked last year, and we are almost certainly the largest urban harvest in the world at this point. We're harvesting more than 2,500 trees over 45,000 square miles from more than 650 different harvest sites. Some of them are really small, like a single tree on a homeowner, and then others are really large. We deal with entire cities where we're harvesting city easements, universities, hospitals, community centers, parks. We're going and harvesting that fruit. So we're harvesting hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of crabapples from urban environments. To bring this kind of back to that point of collecting data, we need to try and maintain that orchard in the best possible way. When do you harvest the trees? What trees in what order do you harvest them in to maximize your day? Because what we have to do is have a really efficient 3 weeks that translates to what we're able to sell for the next year. Right. So again, if we go back to what is my best selling product, the sour apple sold out, our forecasting was wrong. We really under forecasted this, and now we have opportunity loss from now until our next harvest because we just didn't pick enough apples. So we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and figure out, well, how do we revamp what we're doing to get more apples out of this really limited window where the apples are ripe. And that's, again, where it goes back to building our own data feedback system. So that's collecting how much weight we're getting off of each tree, challenging factors to harvest. Is the homeowner Is there unique times that we have to harvest or not harvest? All of those things are directly translatable or applicable to other components of business. Ours is just really weird because we're doing it in an urban setting, but all of those tiny nuanced details translate to huge gains in the efficiency. So for example, we were not super great at the data component to this 2016, 2017, 2018 because we didn't think we needed to be. We never really thought that there was a cap on it. And then as we proceeded past that, by 2022, 2023, we really needed to be more efficient. And so in looking at the two comparisons, we are able now to do with 3 hired people what we needed 22 people to do in 2018's harvest, even though we're harvesting nearly the same amount. And that's fundamentally because we built those data systems to make sure that we're harvesting all the easiest trees first. We're keeping track of how much fruit that is, and then lining up how many trees are we harvesting every single day from that point. So again, to extrapolate that to other businesses that are not necessarily just ours, it's exactly the same thing. You might have days or times where ads do a lot better, and it makes a lot more sense to spend 2 times or 3 times your daily budget on a 2-hour window and then basically turn that ad off for the other 22 hours a day. I have again, that's just an estimate, but that's the nuance between a business doing a few $1,000s a month and a business doing $50,000 a month or $100,000 a month or more, is really those tiny nuances where when you can hit it with everything you've got, you have to be in a position to be able to do that. And then also when there's really nothing to be done about that, you don't always have to be doing something.
Great. Good advice. What is your future plan for yourself and the brand?
So I'm going to make a really big caveat because I didn't think we would be where we are now. So my predictions are almost certainly going to be wildly off. What I would love to see happen, which is actually what we're working on right now, is finding a much larger brand partner that can help us start to tackle some of the mass market grocery that you just need a large balance sheet for. So let's say, for example, Costco or Sam's Club. If they wanted to put us in those stores, we just don't really have the infrastructure to do that yet. And so we're hoping to find a partner. We're talking to a few right now that would give us the physical infrastructure needed to deal with firms like that so that we can really push on what we're doing. What happens to me in the next couple of years? Hopefully more of this. Honestly, the first 6 years of building the brand were not particularly exciting. We had products that we were limited in the category because we were limited with how many apples we have. But in the last year, we've been able to launch products that we really thought were the right categories. And it's now a ton of fun. It's really fun to work with products where people get excited about them, where they do remember you. And so what I hope happens in the next 2-3 years, exactly what I'm doing now, just on a larger scale, and hopefully with more people that are as excited about this concept as me. That would be really what I would love to do.
Awesome. What is some advice you could give to entrepreneurs that are looking to start a brand now here in 2024?
So my biggest piece of advice is find something that's really intuitive and then bring your own interesting flares to it. And I'll explain exactly what I mean by that. When we originally launched Appleflats products, people were not really familiar with Crabapples as a thing. So when we launched a juice product, people didn't really know what to do with it because do I just drink it as juice? Do I mix it with alcohol? Do I use it as a cleaner? What do you do with Crabapples? And that was a really, really challenging struggle that, for the record, we never really solved. We had a counterintuitive product where people don't just look at it and know exactly what to do. We then managed over the years to finally get to a point where we're able to sell soda, and it says soda in big letters right on the front of the can. No one asks me questions anymore. They immediately decide for themselves, hey, I already drink soda, I'm going to try this. And then they do, and then they purchase or don't purchase based on the strength of our product. And so that's been incredibly helpful because we have a distinctive feature built in. We're selling something that is intuitive, that has that distinctive feature. If you're finding something that is really generic and you need to add something that requires education, education is incredibly expensive. It's incredibly challenging. It doesn't really matter whether it's brick and mortar, doesn't matter whether it's e-com, doesn't matter what sector you're in. Educating hundreds of thousands or millions of people on your brand is going to be the most challenging thing that you can possibly do. So find something that your target customer is going to be able to look at immediately and say, okay, I know exactly what I want to do this with, and then allow yourself to be in a competition for positioning your product. So positioning based on price, positioning based on other social characteristics. Don't have the major difference require a huge amount of education, because if it requires tons and tons of education, then that's going to be a huge money pit that you have to throw in there. And yeah, if you manage to acquire customers, they're going to be unique to you because they're educated, but that's the hardest thing that I've ever found to do. And this is somebody who's personally educated more than 400,000 people face to face over the last 7 years. It's not easy. It is not easy to do that education. So find something that's really intuitive, find something that's really exciting, put a new twist on a generic product rather than trying to create something entirely new.
Great advice. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would want our listeners to know about yourself and the brand?
Not necessarily that there would be anything about me. The brand itself is super fun. For the record, if you are interested in having further conversations with me, or you disagree with something that I say, all the Facebook, all the Instagram, all the contact us info on our website goes directly to me. So you're welcome to send me anything. Feel free to disagree with me. I am also totally fine with that. The one thing that I will say is at Appleflats, we've been forced to question market wisdom because a lot of the times we don't have the resources in one scenario or another to do what is commonly acceptable in specific industries, whether it's products, whether it's marketing attempts. We've kind of been forced to do things differently. There's a lot of prevailing market wisdom that is not really effective. So I would say doing this has made me really cynical on who is competent and why does it actually work one way or another. There's a lot of, correlations that are not necessarily causal. And what you really want to do is find one causal relationship. If I do B, A will happen. And that's really what you want to hunt for. That's been the biggest learning experience for me. In a couple of different ways. And we still, for the record, I've been caught out even recently thinking that happens, and sometimes it doesn't. That's the biggest thing that I would say to know about Appleflats is we only hunt for causal relationships, even when they're ugly, even when they go against what I think is how people work. That's what we really hunt for, and it can be really uncomfortable. It can be really challenging. It can make me feel really stupid. Hopefully you guys are smarter than me, and you don't have those type of I can't believe I didn't think of this moment. But if you do, don't worry about it. The nuances, again, that you're going to discover going through this journey, no matter what it is, that's what's going to translate into serious dollars sold, serious dollars for you, serious dollars in your pocket. It's those nuances that is the difference between a micro brand and a major brand.
Definitely, Glenn. Great advice, great everything. It was great having you on. Thank you for your time today, and we appreciate it.
Thanks very much, guys. I look forward to chatting with you guys in the future.
Definitely. Thank you, Glenn.
Bye-bye.